Hello, everyone, and welcome to the month ahead. Today is September 1st, and wow, September is one of those months where I think we may have been able to look at other months and be like, oh, yeah, this is a big month because of all these transits, but it's hard to not look at September in the nature of our evolutionary journey as one of those really critical turning points. And I'll share with you why. I mean, for one, we start the month on the very first day of September with both Uranus stationing retrograde and Pluto, who's in its retrograde right now, is very finishing the very last bits of its time. We're at 0 degrees, 0 minutes. Probably even by the time you're watching this, by the time I finish our, you know, recording from today. Look at that. In less than an hour from now. Pluto will have retrograded back into the sign of Capricorn, 29 degrees, 59 minutes. Now, what's significant about this, and really about this year, we have several outer planet transits that are happening in 2024 that once they complete will never happen again in our lifetime. So we can consider ourselves sort of ancestral in that way, right? Pluto in Aquarius, Pluto in Capricorn. Once this Pluto in Capricorn phase, the retrograde and the direct, completes itself in November, and Pluto re-enters Aquarius at this 0 degrees, 0 minutes, exactly where it is right this moment, right now, it will never do this again in our lifetime. We will see the next 20 years of Pluto in Aquarius. And for many of us, there will be other cycles like Pluto in Pisces and Pluto in Aries, and maybe, depending on how long we live, Pluto in Taurus and Pluto in Gemini, right? My grandmother was born with Pluto in Gemini. Um, but there is an ancestral quality to these because we know as souls in these physical bodies that in the lives that we're living right now, when these transits complete, we won't see that cycle repeat itself. Now, many cycles we see over and over and over again, and we kind of get the benefit of the experiential value of those repetitions, right? For example, the moon moves every 28 days. We get the benefit of the lunar emotional evolutionary integration, and that's a part of why I attuned the week ahead to the movements of the moon predominantly. We're looking at where the moon is going, and I'm reflecting also with the planetary transits as they're happening. But the moon gives us we get lots of ground where we get to really be familiar with the moon. Other planets like Venus and Mercury and Mars also move very quickly, right? We get a chance within an 18-month cycle with Venus to experience all of her movements, right, through the skies. Same thing with the sun, 12 months every year, right? You get a birthday every year. That's your solar return. So outer planets, they're slower moving. They take a longer time. They reflect a more ancestral evolutionary journey. And Pluto, namely, is, the most significant of those in terms of how we're referencing it from an evolutionary astrology perspective. So today, Pluto returns to the sign of Capricorn in the next hour here, probably by the time you're watching this. And then we have Uranus, who's also retrograde. Now, Uranus's cycle is 84 years. So most people will in a lifetime experience a Uranus return. In assuming you live to be a ripe 84 years or more. For sure, most of us will also have a Uranus opposition, right? For those in their 40s, mid 40s, 42 or something like that, right? And Saturn, same thing. You get a Saturn return every 30 years. And most of us get to have that maturing and developing of the relationship with Saturn. The other very big cycle that we're completing here in this year is both Saturn and Neptune leaving the sign of Pisces. And the Neptune cycle and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and their movement out of Pisces into Aries is the second transit that I'm speaking about, which in our physical lifetimes we'll never experience again. They'll never be together again in the sign of Pisces in our lifetimes. So there's this energy, of course, with the significance of an outer planet moving in such a way that we know something is shifting both in our personal, right? And most people don't think of outer planets as being personal, but I think of Pluto as being deeply personal, right? Because it's reflecting the deep desires of the soul. Our personal and our collective journey is reaching a stage of culmination where there is kind of a no turning back. There is a sense that, oh yeah, what's done is done. And when it's done, it's done, you know. And it may not be done yet, right? Pluto is still going to retrograde back into the 29th degree of Capricorn. If you're someone with late degree Capricorn placements and you've been having that whole Pluto or early degree, Aquarius placements, you've been getting that Pluto uh polishing, we could call it, an evolutionary polishing of your soul, really ripening you to um a place of personal power and agency and authority, and of course a place of creative actualization and emotional nurturing, right? That's quite powerful if we look at it, especially from a hindsight perspective. So, and Capricorn has to do with Saturn, and of course, Saturn being in its final transits, really its retrograde cycle through the sign of Pisces, and then it'll be wrapping that up in the end of the year. So we've got a big significant day here with Pluto going back into Capricorn and with Uranus shifting into a retrograde. And then by the time we get really in the next couple of days here, we have Mercury who's direct out of its retrograde, but not out of its shadow. And the shadow period, especially the final shadow after the retrograde, is often a real clarifying integration of everything that's happened in the 3 weeks prior and in the 3 weeks prior to that. Whether, themes, issues, conflicts, breakdowns, resolutions, desires, challenges, whatever that this Mercury retrograde period has brought up during its cycle, right? We know that the retrograde archetype is about accelerating evolution. So whatever Mercury brought up in this time period is part of that acceleration. And then we are moving into a time of reconciling or completing, resolving that acceleration. Then we have Venus, who's in the sign of Libra. And I just did a little special report the other day on the Venus and Libra transit. I'm really, one of the things that's most, important to me in my work astrologically is following the movements of Venus and the movements of Pluto. And so part of what I'm really dedicating myself to in this time is moving us towards the Venus-Pluto Ceres conjunction, which occurs on December 7th of this year. That is when Pluto is back at 0 degrees Aquarius, where it is now, and when Venus has caught up to Pluto and is in that 0 degrees, and also Ceres. Both of them, Venus and Ceres, move from 29 degrees Capricorn into 0 degrees Aquarius, and they both conjoin with Pluto pretty much on the same day. And that's a significant beginning. That's a very significant, both the culmination of the last several years of Venus-Pluto conjunctions, which have all been Venus-Pluto in Capricorn, Venus in Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn, making these conjunctions, beginning these new cycles, beginning, each new conjunction, a new evolutionary stage for Venus, a new evolutionary cycle relative to her relationship to Pluto, where she's going through the whole gamut of, and if you've worked with me, I am introducing the phases and the evolutionary intentions behind those phases in a lot of the work that I'm doing, because it's so significant to be able to see where we are in this growth. And so a part of what I'm introducing in this month is love evolution, which is I've been following the Venus-Pluto cycle, Venus and Mars, Venus, all through these last 3 Capricorn Venus-Pluto cycles. And I've managed to cover Venus through all 12 of the signs of the zodiac and built a library of real resource around Venus and her relationship to Pluto, and Venus in our natal chart. And what does that mean? And the archetype of Venus in every single sign. And so what we're doing beginning September 6th, I have a free introduction class where I'm going to go through the whole Venus cycle leading up to the Venus-Pluto Ceres conjunction. And I'll talk at length in that free class. You're welcome to join me. It'll end up here on YouTube too if you're not able to join me live. But if you can join me live, that's great. You can bring your questions forward, and I love that. But we'll be looking at that really closely. And then beginning on September 13th, we will dive into the Venus and Libra archetype. We will apply these transits to your own natal chart. That's one of the signatures of any class series that you take with me, is that we'll work to directly apply how these evolutionary impulses are moving through your life. And then we're going to go through Venus through you'll have access to Venus through all the houses, through all the signs, so that you'll be able to find your archetypal Venus and listen to past transmissions that I've done. But then we're going to go through Venus in Scorpio, Venus in Sag, Venus in Capricorn, and leading up to this Venus-Pluto Ceres conjunction. And the seed of this, what I'm calling the heart of the revolution, the feminine heart of the revolution. And so what does the feminine heart of the revolution really have to do? Well, it changes the way and the consciousness and the beliefs and the ideas that we are holding about love, and we come into a place where we are able to access deeper love, deeper awareness of the true nature, right? Which Pluto is our bottom line desire nature as souls. And that desire is the desire to return to source, to our creator. And it is often marked by the resistance of our separation from source, right? And so much of the journey of the beloved, whether it's twin flames, soulmates, husbands and wives, parents and children, co-workers, friends, family members, the journey of the beloved is that resistance, separation, connection, unity, and that deep desire that we all have to feel a sense of belonging and to experience true and unconditional love. That which is really can only be truly provided by our source in an unflawed way, but we're often seeking in relationships, sexual connections, possessions, values, ideas, money, time, children, family, success, whatever it is, we're going to be facing where those desires in particular have been formed in our conditioning, and where we're releasing past patterns of manipulation, control, fear, ideas of love that have been disillusioned by, toxic masculinity or toxic femininity, right? All these sort of things that we put in front of this desire that we have for true union with ourselves, within ourselves, which is that presence of like true self-love and self-acceptance, and the desire that we have for union with another, which is the purest, most essential form of love and connection and intimacy that I think all souls on some level desire, if not in great resistance to that, right? Sometimes we can be in great resistance to what we desire because of what we think having that desire might do to us. And in many ways, it will dismantle the way that we think about ourselves or others or the world. And that can be scary. It can dismantle our identity and identity structures. And with Pluto and Aquarius, we're working with collective identity structures, collective social, environments, and individual identity structures, right? On the Leo side of that. So we're really being shaped so much in these times from an evolutionary perspective to come into a way of being and loving and living and understanding ourselves that is free. In a lot of ways, what Aquarius provides us is freedom from the known. That's Jeffrey Wolf Green refers to Uranus as freedom from the known. And Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. And Uranus has been in Venus's sign. So this whole transit in a way is quite interconnected. You see, Uranus and Pluto are in a loose trine here within 3 degrees. And what's the apex of that trine? Interestingly enough, Venus, right? It's so fascinating because, right, she would have been, if she had been at 29 degrees, 29 degrees Virgo, Uranus here at 27 degrees Taurus, and Pluto at 29 degrees Capricorn, right? That would have been, if they were all at 29 degrees of the earth signs, that would have been a perfect trine. But we're within 3 degrees, 4 degrees on either side of this trine, which is showing us that there is a lot of support, especially between Venus and Uranus, for us to revolutionize our relationship to love and to life itself, and to our lives in particular, and into the ways in which our relationships have been stifled by our needs or the suppression of our needs, by our desires or the suppression of our desires, by our voices or the suppression of our voices, right? So there's so much breaking free in that energy. And that's how we start the beginning of September. And it's a balsamic moon, a Leo moon, balsamic. We're working very diligently in this day towards this Virgo new moon, which is you know, a beautiful, fresh start opportunity in a way, but it's not a fresh start about the present so much as it is, this Virgo new moon is really a beginning of returning to ourselves so that the past can be completed, and returning to the past so that we can rededicate ourselves to the future. Um, I really love that idea of return, right? And it was part of my morning. Um, and what happens when we've kind of when we've gone on a journey in our life where we thought we were going to go and get everything. And instead, on that journey, we ended up losing everything. And then we have to come home to ourselves. When I got married, um, gosh, in 2003, so 21 years ago. 21 years ago. It's hard to even imagine. Oh my God. I was 21 years old and I got married, and I thought I was beginning my life, my forever life with my forever person, right? And as I had all these ideas about, especially in my childhood, having grown up in a divorced family with a lot of conflict in the divorce and a lot of pain and a lot of suffering in watching my parents and being the kind of in-between only child. um, I had this real idealism that I was going to get married and be married forever. Like that was so, and my marriage outlived my parents' marriage, hands down. Um, but so I went on this journey, and then ultimately the marriage ended, and there was so much loss and um devastation, a lot of disillusionment that came with the end of that relationship. And so then I came back to myself pretty empty-handed, pretty shell-shocked, pretty scared, and not knowing what life would hold, right? That is some of this energy relative to these transits. And I say that only because a lot of what the work that I did during that time was reclaiming the lost parts of my soul, reclaiming the parts of my soul that had been kind of fragmented by the trauma or the disillusionment or the devastation, really, of the changes in my life. And many of us have experienced this in the world just, since COVID began, but even longer than that. I think, some of the people who are having to really struggle with Pluto and Capricorn have been dealing with that for like the last 20 years. And you're coming out of an old phase of struggle and challenge that feels like it's been maybe in our bones for such a long time that we're accustomed to the way that that feels. And one of the things that was shared this morning in the scripture was the story of Naomi, and how she said, "Call me bitterness, call me Mara," which in Buddhism, it's very interesting. The term Mara in Hebrew means bitterness. um, Mara in Buddhism is the forces of illusion and delusion, greed, ego, fear, that take over the mind. And when the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree, he was really he was facing within himself all those illusions and delusions, and his steadfastness and his devotion to seeing his way through that is what created the path to his ultimate enlightenment that night, right? When he was awakened. And so I really do think, I mean, Pluto is this path of awakening, and Venus is on her journey towards Pluto in awakening our hearts. And we're sort of in that space of maybe where there is some bitterness, or maybe where there is some still illusion and delusion that we're still working through. Confusion can be the same thing. It doesn't, confusion and illusion are, these are very Neptunian words, right? And clarity, truth, the ability to see and be decisive, to be discerning, to know what we desire, to know that we're worthy of love, to know that we can do what we're called to do, to listen to our souls, and to be able to follow that calling, even if it doesn't please others, even if our respect of others following their soul may disappoint us. There is a peace and a humility because we sort of know everyone's in their right place. And when you've lost everything, like many of us have, I think, in this time, when you've lost everything, there also is there's a humility. It's like when you're sort of emptied out by life, there's a feeling of being really close to the earth. If you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, or how you're going to pay a bill, or how you're going to answer, a question within yourself, and you have faith, but even that faith is shaken. I've been really in this process of reconciling with my own faith and my spirituality and my relationship to religion and the church and all of that. And in that whole process, certain things have never really left me, but it is always stayed with me that this is quite a humbling process, because the process of really being with the soul work of our lives, or being in facing the past and facing where we're still feeling stuck or hurt, or like things haven't quite changed in the ways that we've wanted them to change, but we don't yet have an answer for that. Something that humility offers us is a fresh start. And I think that's part of this Virgo new moon. It perfects at 10 degrees Virgo. And then we'll be having our new moon ceremony for those of my students on September 3rd, which is a Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Anyone who's in any of my class series, so including if you just signed up for Love Evolution, which will be starting in September, every month you get to participate in a monthly new moon ceremony where we tune in to the new moon and the lunar cycle, right? But just to give you an idea of how potent the first 4 days of September are, like we have this new moon and we get this kind of beginning energy. We have Venus crossing the South Node. We have this ending energy. We have Pluto going back into Capricorn. There's a lot of shifts. And then Mars enters the sign of Cancer. And right away, the moon squares Mars. You see Mars here completes its cycle through the sign of Gemini. And Mercury rules both Virgo and Gemini. So there's something very instinctual about this change that I think has quite a lot to do with the Mercury retrograde cycle that will be finishing itself up. We'll see the shadow period of Mercury finish in the sign of Virgo, where Mercury started its retrograde. But we have both the moon and Mars moving into cardinal signs pretty much at the same time. And as they do, and as they square one another, I think what it's important to keep in mind is that when those things are happening, something is being instinctually initiated into our lives. And so whether that's we've made a decision with this new moon, we set intentions to be healthier or to be more discretionary with our finances, or we set, whatever, however you're using that Virgo energy, the shift into the cardinal signs really shows me that we have then the support to move that intention into initiation, to move that into a place where we're actually taking action, maybe emotionally, maybe relationally. We're starting to see what we need to do with ourselves. We're starting to see maybe where the old patterns have reemerged, and what came up in the past, retrograde cycle, that we really are in a process of readying for a release and readying for a change, which I think will come in this eclipse cycle. And a part of what happens in this eclipse cycle is that we have the first eclipse is actually in September. That's a part of this month's cycle. And it is in the Virgo Pisces axis. But our nodes, the nodes of the moon, these planetary bodies of space where we are having eclipses, they're just the points, they mark the points in space where the intersection of the eclipses are still in Aries and Libra. And then in October, we'll talk about this for the month ahead in October, we get the Libra new moon annular eclipse, which happens right on October 2nd. So we have 2 months really coming up where the beginnings of these months are rich, deep, powerful transitions, markers of change and evolution. And then we get the rest of the month really to start to try and work it out. And I think a part of what we're working out as we're working towards this Virgo Pisces full moon eclipse, we're working at the Venus and Libra. Venus crosses the South Node. She starts a new phase, a new cycle with the South Node. She will be moving throughout the month towards a square with Pluto, which will be her last and final Pluto square in the sign of Capricorn. That's a significant finish. Done, right? I'm going to keep emphasizing all these places where we finish something and we're done with something and it's never going to come back again, That's not to be ignored because it's relevant to the process that we're in, And when we complete an evolutionary stage, when we actually graduate to the next evolutionary stage, we still have like a whole new beginning, right? Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about it in the cycles of the phases, right? Where we are in that evolutionary intention. So here we are starting a new intention with the South Node, and the moon is there, and Juno is there, and Lilith is there, and the South Node of Venus is there. And to me, that says so much about how deeply we desire to be in relationship with peace and harmony while simultaneously being met in our needs for connection, in our needs for emotional security, in our needs for physical security, right? Human beings haven't learned how to live without physical security, financial security, emotional security, and relational security. We are born into life as babies with those four needs operating all the time, right? We need food from the breast, from the mother. We need to know that we're connected to the being that we came out of. There's an inherent need to be held and to feel safe. We have needs for like housing, provision, and we have needs, for nourishment, for touch, for connection. Cancer needs are primal needs. Capricorn, Capricorn structures are meant to support those primal needs, right? That's the father provider role, the mother nurturer role, right? Libra, Aries, these are primal masculine feminine needs, right? The need for freedom, the need for passion and real connection to our purpose, and the need for relationship, the need for connection to love and peace and harmony, right? And these human needs, which are foundational to life itself, which we come hardwired with on a biological perspective, don't go away because we're older and because we make our own money or because we, whatever, seem to be able to feed ourselves and take care of ourselves, right? They simply become suppressed at a certain level. And in that suppression, right, this Venus square, this Lilith, Juno, Venus conjunction, especially that's coming up, right? There can be a loss of empowerment relative to where we've given our power away to other people to meet our needs and been hurt by that for sure. And where we've been unmet emotionally, physically. I had a dream just last night that was like very telling for me in terms of where I felt desire in the dream, and then I was like looking to see, who I might be attracted to or whatnot, or who I might be connected to. And I met this man and had a connection with him. But then the moment that he shared with me, the moment that I shared that connection with him, he shared with me that his emotional security pattern was withdrawal and avoidance. And I immediately was like, okay, I can't do that anymore. I won't do that. Right. There was a place in the dream where I met the part of myself that has a deeper desire for emotional connection and security. And in this, anyway, I don't want to go too much into it, but I think that's part of this particular Mars transit relative to our emotional needs and desires. Mars is instinctual. Mars is the ruler of the North Node. It last made its conjunction with the North Node. We have instinctual emotional needs to evolve, and often those needs are met through intimacy, through connection. And where we've been betrayed or hurt or abandoned by past connections, where those needs have been unmet, whether because the person was unavailable or avoidant or would withdraw when we would become close and vulnerable, right? That vulnerability has been triggered within us repeatedly. And there's a deeper healing that happens when, we seem to think, especially with the square to the nodes, that the crisis of consciousness, that we have to choose between one or the other. We have to choose between independence and freedom. I follow my own will. I do my own thing. Or we have to choose, between connection. I stay in connection. I stay in this connection because it provides emotional security or physical security or financial security. And that can create a lot of conflict, right? And just as we come to this first quarter square of the moon here in September, we also come to Mars preparing to square the nodal axis. And this to me, the moon will oppose Mars here, and then Mars will square the nodes. Now, in the week ahead, a few, maybe 2 weeks ago, I talked about when the moon does this, right? Here's on the Capricorn side, talked about how it does the moon squares the nodes twice a month. So it'll be sometime, late Wednesday, Thursday for most of us. Where the moon squares the nodes, and the resolution node for the moon is the south node here, right? and the moon rules Cancer, and we have Mars in Cancer in that opposition point, and Mars moves in the very next day to square the nodes, and we get, you know, the resolution node for Mars is that North Node in Aries. So I don't think that it's either or. I don't think that it's that we break free and we're so independent and that we don't need anybody and we don't need relationship and we just do our own thing. I think it's both and. I think that we are learning how to face the vulnerability of acknowledging our freedom and our desires in relationship while staying in relationship with ourselves. And that requires a certain amount of communication, a certain amount of discernment. It requires breaking free from old patterns where we might otherwise feel like we can't communicate, where we can't share, where we can't, essentially wherever we've told ourselves, I don't belong here. I'm not safe here. I can't be myself here. Wherever we have said, I cannot be myself here, I have to do this to be loved. I have to do that to be free. These are the challenges of this particular square, right? This crisis in consciousness breaks us out of those patterns of seeing this duality of freedom and connection, freedom or connection, and realizing that it's a both and. It's a both and thing. It's freedom and connection. It's relationship and evolution. And that's a big part of why we'll be beginning with love evolution. The heart of the revolution is being able to reconcile these crises within our own life, within our own relationships, being able to see these Venus callings as they relate to the work, the money, the resources, the foundations of our life, and working through the crisis in order to evolve. And so then we can come into a deeper emotional relationship to what's happening in our lives and to, this whole process of transformation, right? Pluto is about transformation, deep transformation, and we can get clear. And I think once Mercury clears its shadow in Virgo, we will have a lot of that clarity. Once Mars clears the square to the nodes and, this opposition to Ceres, I do think that we will have a lot more of an energy of resolution and moving forward and progress and a real clear rededication to our own sacred purpose, whether that's our sacred work, our sacred health, our sacred, study, our sacred process. We, until we recognize that all life is sacred and all of, there isn't any part of who we are that is sacred or not sacred, then we'll still be working out some of those pieces. But I do think that a lot of this, this Mars Ceres opposition, when the moon's in Taurus, like everything keeps coming back to Venus. I don't know if you noticed that, but so much of what we're working through, Venus, the moon, Mars, the moon, Venus, it's like things are interwoven in such a way in our lives that we have no choice but to evolve. I recently came across one of my journalings from ceremony, and what the message that I received from the ceremony was that the only thing that is certain is evolution. And there's people say the only thing that's certain is death and taxes. Well, you could choose not to pay your taxes. Yes, you're going to die, but what's certain about death other than nobody knows where you go afterwards or, what happens. right? There's nothing really certain about death. You don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know what's going to come afterwards. There's nothing certain about it. But the only thing that is certain is evolution. And if you know the certainty of your own evolution, that you are in a process of becoming something that your soul has so deeply desired, that your entire lifetime, we could say the why of your natal chart is this deep desire of your own soul's evolution. It is certain that you will, in one way or another, be either cooperating with that or resisting it. And, when Venus gets to this square here with Pluto, I really do think that that's a part of that crux. The push that she's saying is like, you have to evolve. And we have to evolve through relationship, and we have to evolve through our emotional body, and we have to evolve through the changing of our minds about the wounds that we carry, about the past. We have to evolve through a deeper healing that allows us to come into real truth about what we desire, who we are, where we are, and that can of course be a crisis of faith, or it can be a crisis of identity, or it can be a crisis of transformation, right? It can come in all shapes and forms. It can come in all different what we might consider external circumstances. The relationship, the job, the death, the loss, the home, whatever it is that's being transformed. But what we have to pay attention to when those things are being transformed, because they often will be, there will be moments in our lives where we are face to face with those things, and it's difficult and it's hard. And very few people often see us in those evolutionary stages, like there's like a little cocoon team around you, maybe during those times. I know in my own life, the team around me during those times have been very small. And yet, there was something not in the external circumstance, but in me that was becoming through those experiences. And that's the real crisis, is do I let my self emerge, the evolutionary self, the new stage, the new identity? Do I let who I'm becoming emerge through this process and allow it to creatively express, allow it to come into the world, and allow it to become part of my life, right? And do I face when we get into love evolution in this cycle, we're going to go into Venus and Scorpio. She enters Scorpio in September also. So September 23rd. Do I face the shedding of skins, recognizing that each of those old skins are so ready to be buried? Usually they have been ready for a long time. Do I face the humble return to myself, and the reclamation of my own soul, and the reclamation of my own voice, so that you can really face what is being called in your own evolutionary journey? This is, the questions that I think will come with this particular cycle, right? So you can see why I think September is such a big and important time. I totally skipped over the Pisces full moon eclipse. I'll look at that just separate on its own, just for entertainment purposes only, because here we get around to the last quarter square after the full moon, after the sun on the equinox solstice, on the equinox, September 21st. Cardinal points are equinoxes and solstice, right? So we have the spring equinox and the winter solstice and the fall equinox and the summer solstice. And these points mark the path of the elliptical, and in a way, they mark these cardinal shifts of season. So we shift into the season of fall in the northern hemisphere and spring in the southern hemisphere, right? And it's a change of energy. It's a harvesting time here in the northern hemisphere because we're reaping everything that's been planted over these last several months since spring, since April time. So it's a very important and a significant shifting that's happening here that allows us to kind of recognize where we are seasonally and move into the new time. And so that happens, towards the end of this month. And then we get a last quarter square of the sun and the moon in, on that day, a few days after the shift. And we get the moon with Mars in Cancer. Also, we get Venus coming together with her south node in that time. And we're just, in a way that this kind of culmination energy is preparing us for the new moon eclipse that will come in October, that we'll talk about for next month. But I want to just emphasize, with the evolutionary journey, there's something about cycles, right? Where everything is pushing us down, 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 deep into a process, and then up again and emerging, and then down, down, deep into a process, right? This is how the sun moves around the zodiac wheel. This is how the moon moves every month, right? Venus is going to do her own thing, same, moving down, down, deep into a process. And each one of these planets that emerges through the south node over this month are significant. Each one of these planets that is squaring the nodes, whether the moon on either side or Mars, right, is significant to a very particular personal element of our journey within our own lives. One that I think is actually quite vulnerable. It's not necessarily the thing that we're talking to people about, although we might be able to access points where we can talk to people about it. And more there might be as we emerge into that energy of who we're becoming, as we shed skins, as we resurface into our relationships, and especially as Mercury enters the sign of Libra towards the end of this month, we might really be able to get a sense of actualizing in our voice and being able to share more of our story and being able to express more clearly. And, then we end the month of September with the sun crossing the south node, Mercury crossing the south node, and that ending energy, right, where we just end this month like, okay, there's a purification process happening through this month, essentially, that begins a whole new cycle of relationship, a new cycle of relating, a new cycle of intimacy, a new emotional cycle, a new cycle relative to our own personal desires and how we relate to relationship. And so I want to just share with you this eclipse that we have on September 18th as I close our month ahead. So it's a partial lunar eclipse. And one of the, signatures with the eclipses is that they need to be within 11 degrees of the nodes. So it's a lunation between the sun and the moon, either a full moon or a new moon. And it's within 11 degrees of these points in space where the eclipses happen, right? And so in this case, we have our first Virgo Pisces event. And then next year, we will actually have the nodes of the moon move into Virgo and Pisces. I always think of these kind of events where we have the lunar nodes in a different sign than the actual eclipse lunation as being precursors. They're giving us a foreshadowing. They're showing us maybe the culmination of what's occurred over the course of the entire, you know, cycle with these lunar nodes. So we have the ruler of the nodes, the ruler of the south node, Venus, in her own sign, Libra, in the sign of the south node. And we have the ruler of the north node, Mars, in a square to the nodes, as I spoke about. And then we have the moon in Pisces applying to Neptune, right? We're going to have the lunar nodes move back into Pisces and join with Neptune, as Neptune and Saturn are both moving into Aries and starting a completely new cycle, a new lifetime cycle. One thing that's very significant about this is, do you see how much conflicted culmination energy, like full moon culmination, lots of retrograde planets, Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, Venus in a new phase to the south node, Mercury completing its post shadow, all this different, all this different energy. I think both giving us foresight into the future and a retrospective completion of the past that's saying what's done is done. As I began this, this particular episode. So with that, knowing that going into September, we have the Virgo element of discernment that we get to activate in this. Virgo Pisces is often I seen as the victim, martyr, victim, perpetrator, but I also think of it as like Christ or Jesus, right? The beloved oneness with God, with humanity, total love and compassion for all things, forgiveness, and the process of purification that brings us to forgiveness, the process of humility that brings us to wholeness, the process of loss that brings us into transformation. So there's a lot of that energy here in this particular eclipse that is really just pointing us home to ourselves. There's great power here for soul retrieval, for for ceremony, for prayer, that is about coming home to harvest the lessons, to integrate, and to really release and complete the past. To see, where am I now that I can say I now give myself permission to move into something new, to love something new, to open to something new, to be ready for something new by completing what's here now, by completing where I have been before, And when the soul completes its journey, it just, we don't know where it goes. Does it start again? I've been thinking a lot about souls that are lost very young, and whether or not that really is an indication of an accelerated soul program, right? Someone who got it really quickly. Maybe we didn't even see that they got it, but they got it, right? And there's something healing for us when we do finally get it, whatever the lesson has been, and we're then ready in a different way to be, not necessarily that we have to leave the old behind, because we're always working with evolution actually being the ground, right? We are our ancestors' dreams. We are their survival. We are also their traumas and their wounds, right? And their conditioning is still in us. And in a way that this to me is showing how well the pathway to healing is being activated, how deeply committed we are to that healing, and how important it is to our own evolutionary journey. So may this month be a healing month for you, my friends. I hope that you'll join me for Love Evolution. Just come for the free class. Sign up. There's links in the description to this video, and on my website, you'll find the event, the free event. you get a Zoom link. You can join me for the free class. If you can't make it for the class, you can find it here on the YouTube channel afterwards. And if you feel a calling to study Venus in your own chart, to understand this Venus-Pluto journey through the end of the year and wrap up this year really leaning into your own evolution, this is a great place to do this with me. I create a container for us to work deeply together, and we're really just here to learn what love really is. That's the bottom line. And where the source of that love is and where we're going eventually in time. All right, my friends, so much love to you. Thanks so much for listening. As always, give this video a thumbs up. If you love something, if something touched your heart, please share it with me in the comments. I love hearing from you, even if it's a little heart-shaped emoji. I appreciate you so much for listening, and bye for now.